Okay. Feeling
All
okay?
right. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. All right. Cool.
Really wish I would have brought my reading glasses down. That's okay.
Oh, do we have an extra pair of reading glasses? Oh, you can use mine.
No, I'm good.
It's only a 1.5 because I just need it for the beginning.
Yeah,
That's
mine's
it.
a 1.5 too.
Here, I'll just.
No, it's good. It's
Okay.
good. I don't know. Maybe I will borrow that from you.
That's fine. Yeah. Welcome to In the Act. It's a radio program on process and the creative life. Creativity does not just start and stop with artists. We all make creative or aesthetic or guiding decisions. Our aim is to talk through the process and investigate how we choose to express ourselves and live creatively. And we're connecting with people about their lives. That's the subject of our show. Broadcasting from Mead Public Library in Sheboygan, Wisconsin on Mead Community Radio, I'm Erica Hunsinger, and this is In the Act. And today's guest on In the Act is Melissa Prentice.
Hi.
Hi. I'm going to pass those over.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, much better. Look at this.
Share glasses. So I'm so glad you decided to be on, agreed to be on, I should say. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Yeah. It's so fun. We work together and share a lot of humor and a lot of, I think, love of great pizza, Chicago pizza specifically.
Definitely. And Jardiniera.
Yeah. Hot jarred.
Hot jarred.
Yeah. So I guess I wanted to touch base and kind of get into some of the fun and interesting things that I think of you and I think creatively, because I find you to be open and smart and engaged and always have like book recommendations or all these different things that I find really interesting. And so I don't know. Yeah.
Sure. Well, thanks for that, because I was going to actually ask you the question, why did you ask me to be on the show?
Yeah.
So I appreciate that. That helps give me some understanding of where you're coming from. And I love the whole premise of In the Act for the reason that, you know, creativity is something that I think we all employ in almost every aspect of our lives.
Totally.
And yet most of us don't think of it that way. So
Right.
I myself included, honestly, I can say that like intellectually, abstractly, but when I think about immediately my everyday life, I'm like, I don't think it's that, but it is.
Right. And I think people mistakenly combine creative with artist.
Right.
Like you don't have to be an artist to be creative. Or again, right? You make these great decisions every day. Like,
Well, and even how I think we conceptualized what art is or what being an artist is
right.
is incredibly narrow too.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
Including like with music and books, literature, you name it. I know I was just reading this morning about another woman podcaster in Wisconsin, actually, that I just found. I don't remember her name, sorry. But she was talking about abstraction and realism and the folks that, you know, discredit abstraction as an abstractionist. I'm always like defending, you know, when is it done? What is it? My kid could do it. I could have done that. Why is this art? This isn't art. Like all of those pieces.
Yes.
And it's so interesting because there are these absolutes that are given to people's expressions in whatever medium and form that is, that other people decide that it is creative or it is not. And that is just such a wild thing. Like anything that you're going to create outside of yourself has value.
Yes. I need to remember to speak and not just nod my head.
Oh, yeah. I know. I know. Well, the hand movements and everything are important.
Absolutely. So when I think about myself and how I, what creative processes I'm working within or kind of utilize within my life, I think a lot of it is how I think about things and how I sort of view my sort of worldview.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
It does.
I know you're also a astrology and tarot person, and which means you probably also enjoy things like Myers-Briggs.
I do.
And what's your Hogwarts house,
right?
And things like that. But to me, I'm very drawn to those things too, and I see those as that's symbolism, that's imagery, that's kind of understanding yourself through these abstract concepts.
Absolutely.
And that really resonates with me. And I think that part of the core of my personality is being a kind of a systems thinker.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't do real well with you have this discrete task in front of you, work through the tasks.
Right.
I need to understand the whole picture.
Yep.
And how what I'm doing fits within some larger framework.
Right. Yeah.
It's how I approach my work, but also kind of how I approach my life too.
Yeah.
And I think, and I'm being really kind of broad and generic about that, so I'll try and bring it in more specifically.
Yeah.
But I think the approach I've taken to being a manager at the library is thinking about first, what is the purpose of a library?
Yeah.
What role does it serve in the community?
Right.
And that's multifaceted. I could go into that. I mean, I suppose why not? I think the library as a center for the community is, that's sort of the talking point in the library world now. We're a third space. We're a gathering spot.
Right.
We're not just about books. All of that is true. That sounds a little markety to me. I don't kind of like that framing of it. What I would say, I think, is that a library to me is a challenge to our larger system and way we do things because it's so different from how capitalism operates.
Right.
And it's so rare to have a glimpse of that in everyday life.
Oh, for sure.
I know people have said this. I'm kind of paraphrasing different library-related quotes, but essentially that if somebody had the idea for public libraries today, it would never happen because of the political landscape we're living in. And I agree 100%. Yeah. It's also the reason why I think it's so important to defend the library as a concept right now, because I think there's all sorts of threats to the public sphere in general, but specifically libraries. So I'll talk about one of my favorite books, which is not really a book. It's about an 81-page manifesto called Capitalist Realism by Mark Fisher.
Okay.
And people...
Can you give me a date on that? Do you a roundabout?
Roundabout, I want to say 2003.
Yeah. Okay. I'll put it on my list.
Yeah, it's one of those things that it's sort of like a confirmation bias thing. When I read it, I was like, oh, yeah, obviously, this is all true. But having a framework for understanding how I think about things was really interesting to me. And it's something I refer back to in my brain all the time.
Yeah.
So
that's great.
So, and I'm a big critic of capitalism.
Yeah.
And I think one of the things that's powerful about the library is it's a direct challenge to capitalist realism. And the concept is basically that we are, as a culture, unable to imagine a world without capitalism. that is how deep the propaganda is.
Sure.
So it's a system that almost doesn't need any organized propaganda because it's colonized our imaginations to the extent that we can't think outside of it.
Yes. Colonized our imaginations.
Yes.
I just wanted to pause on that. Whoa. I agree.
And so I think one of the powerful aspects, again, of the public library is that it is a kind of socialist infrastructure.
Yeah.
Like the whole process of how you use public funds
Yes.
to provide information, resources, education, programs, space
Oh, yeah.
to the public, and then just all of the kind of behind the scenes work that it takes to even have a library of books and materials to lend to people.
Right.
And the sort of culture we create of sharing, right? That it
Yeah.
is possible.
Yes.
That it,
Yeah.
it-
It is really like sharing. Yeah.
yes.
Right.
It is possible to have a public good that is available to everyone that we all share and use together.
Yes.
And so what I think about is, what if we took that model and just expanded it out to many, many more aspects of society?
Wow.
And so that's one of I think the real powers of a public library is
It's a model.
it opens up our imaginations for what is possible.
Yeah.
And I think that
In real time.
Correct.
In real experience.
yes,
All over the
and
country.
it's tangible.
Yep.
And it's very, and like I said, the behind the scenes work of it. I mean, the databases that we use to keep track of patron information or to track the books we've purchased and how they're checked out and how they're returned and how they're billed when they're not.
Right.
And the whole cycle of these things, how many times they're checked out when they need to be replaced.
Right.
That's a kind of the workings, the inner workings of the library that goes unseen by the users,
Absolutely.
but
yeah.
really is the structure that holds everything in place.
Oh, yeah. Skeletal.
Yes. So as a systems thinking person, as a person who is very interested in all things that benefit the collective, I find like library work speaks to me on a kind of, I don't know, soul level, I guess.
Yeah.
Now, I will say that the actual day-to-day work of being a middle manager, of working with the public,
Sure.
is not so sexy.
Yeah.
You know, it just isn't.
Yeah.
But I think the ideal behind it is worth continuing to strive for and continuing to put our efforts and energy into.
Yeah, absolutely.
And to thinking about how that looks beyond the library.
Yeah.
What if we thought about more of our space that way? You know, when I think about the challenges that libraries face right now, which to me is like having to be everything to everyone,
Yeah, right.
you know,
It's a big task.
yes.
A little too much.
The fact that we, you know, are essentially social workers, we are essentially, you know, teachers' aides, co-parents, you know, all of these things that those of us who intentionally went into library work, like did the MLIS and wanted to do this, not at all anything that they teach you about with libraries.
Right. Yeah.
But to me,
Because I think it's shifted so quickly.
Yes.
I think too. Their education hasn't caught up to what the present library system looks like.
yes. And what that suggests is, no, we don't need the library to take on more of these things.
Yeah.
We don't need the library to be the only third space. We need more third spaces.
Right.
We don't need the library to be a resource for people experiencing trauma, addiction, housing insecurity. We need to solve those problems
Yes.
as a culture, right?
Instead of editing out the library
Yes.
because those are some of the issues that are seen within the institution, people are like, well, I don't go to the library, I just buy my books now instead, or I do this class online instead, to avoid, instead of that, trying to come at it the other way. And because of that, how do we engage differently? Correct. Like using these, like there's that stupid meme that I'm so tired of, but makes sense anyway, is that like being comfortable with being uncomfortable or whatever. I don't know where that came from, but that, what I think part of that is when you feel uncomfortable, to try and identify that, like what feels like there's this erosion or corroded thing that you're uncomfortable about, that's, can you identify it? And then how can you help? How can you make a difference? Where in that is our responsibility as a society, as a community, as family, as friends? We're all in these like little spaces together to be able to encourage change within those. Like, how do we use our voice?
Yes. And I think another aspect of it, and you kind of touched on this in your comment, but is how we connect with each other as a community.
Yeah.
Right? Because these silos and this segregating of social life happens, we think, naturally. I would argue again that that's capitalist realism.
Yeah.
Making those systems look invisible, but those structures are very much there, and they direct us into our little slots based on, a variety of things. What family you were born into, race and economic status. Did you go to college? Do you have debt? Do you have a partner? Do you have children? Do you live alone? Like all of these things that factor into how we engage with other people in our community. And the library kind of, I think, is this sort of liminal space that temporarily collapses those silos.
Absolutely.
Because it's a place where people from all backgrounds and walks of life come together.
Yep.
They're not necessarily interacting with each other, but they are sharing space.
Absolutely.
And even that is rare.
Yes.
I would say in particular along class divisions.
Yes.
I think our social circles can be diverse in other ways, but that is a really rare thing for people across and I mean big class barriers.
Yes.
So we have the wealthy people who live on the lakefront in Sheboygan use the library, as do the homeless individuals who either stay at the Salvation Army or don't have a place to stay. Those people are together in the library. There's no other space where that's happening.
Right. Yes.
It's like I'm going to talk about capitalism. Yeah.
Of course, I spit out my water. I'm Erica Hunsinger. This is In the Act, and we are here with Melissa Prentice. Hello.
Hello.
We are talking about, right now, we're talking about capitalism and realistic capitalism.
Capitalist realism.
Capitalist realism.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And just on the heels of that the wealthy and the extreme poor are sharing space in a building, and using the same resources as well.
Yeah.
And being treated equally by staff members.
Yes.
They're not getting tips, it's like getting more so. One person's going to get a better shake on something than someone else. They're all treated, hopefully, as best can do.
Yeah.
Treated equally, and that I think also can be quite unsatisfactory for a lot of people.
Yes. And so I'll just go right into it. So the recent political attack on libraries that's been about 2 years in the making now.
Yeah.
So that is for anyone who's unfamiliar, would be this increase in book banning that we're seeing happening nationally, particularly around any kind of content that is about LGBTQ people or people of color. Yep. It's clearly an effort to silence diverse voices and experiences.
Absolutely.
And I think that always needs to be said.
Yes.
But it's kind of dressed up in a moral panic about children.
Yes.
And what kids have access to. So I think a couple of things are happening there. I think one, it is part of, and the individual actors, to be clear, I don't think necessarily see themselves as part of this larger systemic attack.
You don't?
Some of them do. I think the folks orchestrating the moral outrage absolutely do.
Right.
The folks, at the local level that are the ones getting outraged and carrying it out, I don't necessarily think they see themselves as basically pawns in a political game.
Right. Yeah. Agreed.
So I think it is part of a larger attack on the public sector.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
The public good. Yes. And the idea that a public good even exists or should exist.
Or can exist.
Correct.
Right. Should exist is it makes me so mad. Because it's in schools too, public schools,
yes.
public libraries. Yes.
And this may be one of my more controversial takes of our interview, but I feel that the resistance to do anything around gun control vis-a-vis school shootings is part of the same political motivation, which is that ultimately to undermine public schooling as a concept.
Absolutely. I 100% agree.
To suggest to people, you're absolutely right, schools are not safe.
Right.
You shouldn't send your kids there.
Right. You should privatize them. And
right. Privatize schools, homeschool. Same thing with healthcare, libraries. And it's also not a coincidence to me that all of these fields are female dominant in their workforce. Yeah. So it's also a patriarchal backlash. Right. Let's get women out of the workforce
and traditional relationships
and back into traditional roles in the home where they're not paid.
That's right.
So,
yeah.
So yes, I see public libraries as very much like right now at the center of that sort of larger political atmosphere that's happening, but we are kind of a piece of a larger puzzle.
Yeah. And supporting all voices.
Yes.
That are for public and community good.
Correct.
Like of those intersections, where are those intersections? And supporting and strengthening those bonds.
Mm-hmm. And I think
it's hard work.
So there's real power there.
Absolutely.
My other big thing that I'm so anti-capitalist, but also really pro-democracy, and I mean like small d, of which none of us have actually experienced. I want to be clear.
Oh, yeah.
None of us know what democracy actually is in practice.
And
what we understand it to be in the United States is electoralism, which is one very small aspect of how democracy should actually function, right?
Yeah.
And that also goes into how do you feel about representative democracy versus direct democracy? I won't go down that rabbit hole, but I will say that an approach I like to take to my work in the library and also kind of in life generally is to bring as much democratic processes to things as possible.
Can you break that down?
Yes. I would be happy to. So because I think we are so unfamiliar with what it means to be practicing democracy, I think allowing people as many opportunities to do that can be a kind of radicalizing force across time.
Absolutely.
So
from familial to government.
Correct.
Yes.
So where do you practice democracy in your life? And that to me is where are you making collective decisions with another person or more than one person and negotiating conflict
Yes.
Because that is the other thing too. Democracy is conflict. I think,
and it's messy.
It's very messy.
It's messy, and people don't want to do that because it's messy. They just want to have, one answer. Like, at least I know that that king is going to say that this is no or this is yes, and then I will just follow that, because I don't want to get into the weeds and take the time to actually negotiate the other person's perspective and to deal in critical thinking to be able to find this meld between us. It is a really difficult thing.
It is. And I think that it's just so multi-layered, right? Yeah. The typical professional workplace is all about avoiding conflict.
Yeah.
The standard mode of communication is passive-aggressive. And
yes.
And we all, and I include myself in this. I mean, I don't mean to be like sort of this arbiter of like, you're all doing it wrong. I mean, we are living and breathing this culture. We all fall into it.
Right. Oh, yeah.
So the kind of resisting it and offering an alternative to it has to be a conscious and constant thing you do.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
You know? So in terms of work practices, I like to have space for all of the staff to contribute their ideas to what the work should look like, what their work life should look like, how they want to serve the community, like what programs they want to do, as opposed to this kind of top-down, this is how it is. Which
is very different. Like, these are the roles that I'm assigning to you,
correct,
and that you shall fulfill.
Yeah,
that's really how most jobs work. And you're taking that's a very different approach.
And it requires trust, but I also feel like, trust is a nonlinear thing too.
Yeah.
Right. Another favorite book of mine is Emergent Strategy by Adrienne Marie Brown.
Oh, someone just told me about that.
Yes. It's a really, she kind of takes, she's an activist by training and has kind of an anarchist framework for things.
Yeah.
But what I think is really powerful about it, it's a book about basically how to organize, how to be in community with people, how to, like, it's a strategy for getting stuff done.
Right.
That is non-hierarchical and organic and looks to the natural world for inspiration. So like mycelial networks and how they communicate, murmurations of starlings and that sort of thing. So
awesome.
For someone who likes symbolism, who thinks in systems, it really hits my brain in the right way.
Totally. And I just saw birds flying in the sky and little mushrooms. So thank you.
One of my favorite sections of it is about trust building. So whatever you're trying to build, whatever community you're trying to create, or, if you're organizing for something, some sort of activist thing, you're trying to get something done, move at the speed of trust. And what does that mean?
Yeah.
I think how she phrases it, my favorite quote is, trust the people and the people become trustworthy.
Ooh.
So
trust the people and the people become trustworthy. Okay.
So you have to make that leap. You have to fight your own cynicism. That's capitalist realism. Not trusting people, thinking that people are inherently untrustworthy or have poor motives. So you have to fight that conditioning, and you have to give people the space to become trustworthy.
Right. Oh, man.
So that's letting go of ego, and again, all of that social conditioning, or at least attempting to.
And that's like onion sphere. That's like for self, that's for your intimate relationships, familial, family, like into the world. I don't think that that's just work related.
Yes. So how that applies to like the day-to-day work of the library does mean that sometimes, maybe there's people that don't hold up their end of the bargain, right?
Yeah.
They're not committed to doing the work that they say they're going to.
Yeah.
Or, there's all kinds of things that can happen with people and personalities and that sort of thing. But to me, to go back to trust is to remember that very, very few people have sinister motives for what they do.
Yeah.
That's just not where they're coming from. There's something else at work there. So you try and get to the bottom of that, and you give people the space to screw up, to make mistakes, to learn from them.
Absolutely. Respond to them, correct whatever. Yeah. And to keep your heart open. I think that's really hard because we've all been really hurt in the past. Everybody on the planet, like we've all been really hurt. And so it's hard to, I think, keep your heart open enough in whatever space to be like, I'm going to still try and go with trust first. How do you do that? How do you, because that's what I want to know. How do you do that? How do you, because I think I try, I think of in some ways, so I'm just babbling at the moment, but like, I think I've worked really hard to train myself to encounter something almost for the first time. Like, all right, let's try it again. Let's try, allow for mistakes, allow for those things. Beginner's mind. Is that what it is? Yeah. But how do you do that? How do you stop yourself and go, all right, I'm going to go from trust? What does that look like to you?
Oh boy, that's a heavy question.
I know.
I would say it doesn't always work.
Yeah, right.
Because again, I mean, all of that, both social and cultural baggage and personal baggage
totally
comes into play all the time.
Absolutely.
To me, I think always what it is just reflecting on an extreme emotion when you have it. Like, okay, I'm getting angry about something, and just pause and try and understand why that is. I feel like oftentimes those types of emotions come from ego.
Yeah.
And when you can consciously put that aside and make it not about you, then you can move back into that space of trust.
So you're actively pausing, you said, and then you're actively walking through a tiny scenario in your head of like, not me, hold up, I'm going to flip it to the other person's perspective or the other system perspective to see where that activity is coming from.
Yes.
So pausing, like switching and identifying. Yeah. How do you pause when you're angry?
Well, I have an easy time with that because I'm sort of a natural pauser.
Nice.
I am not. It's that fire energy, it's just reactive. But, okay, so we'll get into some Myers-Briggs and astrology while we're at it. But as an earth sign, and as do you know your Myers-Briggs? I always like to ask people.
Oh, I can't remember. I'm like emotional, intuitive, ENT.
Okay.
What is T?
Thinking.
Yes.
I am an INTJ.
INT. What's the other? Judgment? Yeah. ENTJ.
Okay. Oh, interesting.
Yeah.
That's pretty similar.
Yeah.
So I think what it is that I am sort of contemplative by personality.
Yeah.
So I may be internally angry, but I always feel the need to pause and think about things. Like I need to process my emotions before I externalize.
Okay.
I shouldn't say always. Like
No. These are generalizations.
Yes.
They're more often than nots.
Yes.
They're not absolutes.
I do think it's a personality thing though for me, and that I am curious about those kinds of things in myself, and I want to understand them.
Right. It's a part of a larger reflective time, like to use as tools to understand ourselves and our world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So being slow and methodical doesn't bother me. Taking time to think about things doesn't bother me. I'm sure it bothers other people.
Yeah.
But that's just, I've also reached a point in my life, I think as an over 40 person, this is something that happens too, where you just start caring less about what other people think about your behavior.
Yeah, right.
Which is so liberating.
Yes.
And I don't mean that in like a sort of callous or flippant way. I mean, I certainly care about how I make other people feel.
Right.
But to the extent that I care about sort of the externalization of myself and how people interpret that.
Yeah. I hear that a lot more from women than men.
Yeah.
And over 40. And I think that has a lot to do with sexual prime, quote unquote, in your 20s and always, or whatever. But having to represent something that's not aligned with who we are.
I think there's a lot to that. I think that women often, or, feminine presenting people, if you want to be broader about
Absolutely.
it, I think
Great.
often that is a skill you learn later, whereas, men are taught to not care what other people think from a young age. And and again, not to universalize it.
Right.
But I think that there is definitely a gender dynamic to it, that we have to learn that skill.
Right.
As opposed to it being kind of, I'm supposed to care what other people think.
Right. Yeah. And I know that was tangent. I just had to pop that in there.
But yeah.
I'm going to have to go back because it is the T thinking and there's I intuitive.
Yeah. So
right? I'm pretty sure that I'm not a T. I'm pretty sure that I'm an I.
So the IE is introvert extrovert. I think it's N.
Oh, okay.
N is intuitive.
That's what it is. Okay.
Then it's thinking, feeling, judging, perceiving.
Right. Okay.
So tracking back a little to the whole the way I sort of think about things and kind of putting this into the sort of larger worldview perspective.
Yeah.
And the creativity aspect of it is I've always been a reader.
Yeah.
I've always been imaginary worlds kind of person. I was as a kid.
Yeah.
I did read something. I think it might have been just like a meme or a tweet or something like that. Very small. That was like, were you an avid reader as a kid? And it was like, that means you learn to disassociate early in life. I was like, oh, okay. Yeah, that tracks. But I think the other thing that the sort of capitalist realism robs us of is our ability to imagine alternatives to the status quo.
Thank you.
At all.
I agree with you.
And in fact, that is the sort of the psychological weight of capitalism
like
is
a
that
curtain.
Yeah. Is that we can't, you see it manifested in so many ways that we talk about politics in our world, that this is just the way it is.
Yep.
There's no hope in changing it, so why even bother?
Right. Yeah. I love when you do Cooper's keyboards in vocal form. I love it. Welcome back to In the Act. This is Erica Hunsinger. I am Erica Hunsinger. And we are with Melissa Prentice. Thank you so much.
Yes.
I want to get back into that idea of capitalism impacting our ability to have creative expressions, or I think I would even attach abstraction to that. I believe, and I haven't really vocalized this, but I think that with the advent of lots of realism that we see in pop culture, in paintings and artwork, there's so much realism that happens within like identifiable forms, and I think that it's of that sort of nature.
Yes, 100%. And in fact, Capitalist Realism, the text, talks about that specifically, about the way the actual tools used to limit our imagination are art, media, things like that, that would normally, I would say normally, and ideally would be things that spark our imagination.
Right.
Produced under capitalism actually limit it. So an example would be, think about films or books that have kind of post-apocalyptic themes or dystopian themes. They oftentimes are critiques of capitalism.
Right.
But they're never offering an alternative to it.
No.
It's always, and the quote from the book from Capitalist Realism is, it's easier to imagine the end of the world than the end of capitalism.
Oh.
So,
well, I think because capitalism is such an abstracted idea.
Correct.
To define it and to hold on to it as like, how do we, it's very easy to see what destruction looks like. Mm-hmm. It's dark and, like you can see it. Yeah, I get it. So how do you identify what that looks like to hold on to it to incur change?
Yeah. I don't know. I think that it goes back to the democracy piece. I think we find the answers to those things in community.
Yeah, I agree.
In resolving conflict, in building space and stuff and community that falls outside of that kind of capitalist realism.
Yeah.
And so touching back on the democracy thing a little bit, I certainly don't want to give the impression that I think that as a middle manager, I actually have the power to make the workplace democratic.
Yeah.
Unions have that power.
Right.
That's what they do.
That's what collective bargaining is.
Yes. And I think that is actually one of the real powers of a union, is obviously like for people to have better control over their work, get paid more, get better benefits. That's all great. But I think it actually trains people in the democratic process.
Yeah, for
it
sure.
It teaches you how to work through conflict.
Right.
It teaches something we are so lacking right now, solidarity.
What do you mean by that?
I mean seeing ourselves as part of a struggle with the people around us, seeing their struggle as ours. So.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So
like we're having trouble seeing that we're othering them.
Correct.
Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Yes.
Instead of like, we are together. This is us.
So to me, I mean, like one example that I can use from the library is the unhoused community that uses our space. People have all kinds of feelings about that.
Oh,
I mean,
gosh.
Across the spectrum.
Yeah.
Good, bad, and otherwise.
Yeah.
But what if you framed it as we should all be in solidarity with those folks? Because under capitalism, unless we own the means of production, and none of us do, we are how many steps away from being in that same position?
Absolutely. Right.
I think the same thing for people experiencing addiction or mental illness,
Yes.
that so much of those
Medical
things are products of the society we live in.
Yeah.
And the structure of capitalism is that not everyone is going to succeed. That's how it works. That's
Right.
how you can have billionaires
Right.
and millionaires.
Right.
And is that you have great human suffering as well.
Yes.
So that goes back to the imagination piece and the democracy piece. How can we build that solidarity with each other? How do we build community, collective decision-making, and create the world that we really want? And I think even outside of ideology, I think most of us want the same things.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I think that like there'll probably always be to some extent like individual tendencies towards more conservative or traditional values versus more progressive or liberal. I'm not talking about like the elimination of those differences in worldview. I'm talking about a sort of a collective goal. Like what we want is to have our basic needs met. Mm-hmm. We want to have connection with other people. Mm-hmm. That can look all kinds of different ways. And we want space to be creative and to rest.
Yes.
And so I think, I mean, that to me is where like the power of creativity outside of capitalism kind of just blows my mind. Yeah. And when I really think like imagine what that world could be, to me, imagining something outside of capitalism means unlocking all of human potential.
Yeah, for sure.
I mean, just think about that.
Oh my gosh.
Like what the world could look like. Yeah. I mean, we think that capitalism is the only way we can innovate.
Right.
But capitalism has been around for 600 years. Human beings have been innovating for long beyond that.
Absolutely. You can't really leave it out of the human condition.
Right.
You know, there was a book called, I don't remember. It's by Ellen Dissanayake or Dissanayake. I don't know, maybe 95 or something. And she really does talk about how early on, you know, that when you're bored or, you know, I don't know, that there's innate creative things that you're going to do, whether it's dragging a stick through the dirt or carving something or clapping or communicating new ways of information. And, you know, I think when you're talking about community and having, you know, it gave me a little bit of goosebumps, and I was trying to like decipher then, like, well, what does that look like? How do you break it down? What does democracy look like? Or those kind of common threads. And it seems so much a part of communication and how poorly trained we are, including myself, I think, with communication. And, you know, for example, instead of saying no, say no and why. You know, just giving a reason. Is it safety? Is it, you know, but that's the difference between a democratic no and an authoritative no. It's like no because I said so, or no because it's not rooted in safety. You can't go on that railing because it's not safe. Those kind of things. At like base level, tiny. And what does it look like if you expand on it? And, you know, in terms of like communications, I can't help but think of, you know, all this like cancel culture that we've been through too. And that it allows an elimination. And I'm not saying that it's across the board bad, because I think sometimes that needs to happen. I am saying that that there's this wave of canceling people without navigating a conversation. And I think that's part of it. I think that's wholly part of this edit out what you don't like.
I agree with you. I think that so cancel culture is one of those of the moment things that I think people have actually different interpretations of what they think it is.
Yes.
And how much of a problem it is.
Yeah.
So I kind of, what I find frustrating about the debate around it is I kind of think that both of the loudest sides of that are both wrong.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
In that I don't think, so I would dispute who's actually getting canceled, for one. And what does cancellation mean?
Right.
Are we talking about consequences for your actions?
Yes.
Or are we talking you literally have lost employment and can't find a job again, or you're destitute because you've been canceled?
Right.
With these kind of celebrities, that has rarely been the case.
Right.
I mean, I'm thinking like one of the more known examples, right? Louis C.K. is doing comedy tours again.
Right.
So he's not been canceled.
Right.
He had consequences for his actions, which is that he lost some TV shows.
Right.
You know, On the other side of it, though, is that we are completely shutting down the ability for people to learn from their mistakes,
Yes.
to grow from them,
Right.
to be in community again.
Right.
And to me, all of that is part of capitalist realism,
Right. Agreed.
100%.
Yes.
And one of the facets, the more specific facet that it is connected to is sort of our carceral mindset around judgment and punishment, which means that when you do something wrong, you are removed from society.
Yes.
So
Can you say what that is again?
carceral as
Yes.
like the incarceration system,
Yeah, okay. Yep.
punitive.
Yes.
And I think that the idea of transformative justice is, again, the sort of broad concept that we hear about in these sort of, these big institutions need to change this way. But actually, so I'm tying it back again to emergent strategy, because one of the things she says is think fractally, which means start small.
Yep.
So small is all. Small change is how you get to big change.
Absolutely.
So instead of thinking about how do we change our criminal justice system, is how do you change the cop inside you?
Absolutely.
The part of you that wants to see people punished that way.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And what is the alternative to that?
Right. And that's that pause again that you were
Yes.
talking about. That's so important.
Yes. And it's interesting because the other thing, too, is that I think a lot of people who get wrapped up in the cancel culture thing, which to me is honestly sort of just an internet phenomenon.
Agreed.
It's the way that online communication has really flattened how we interact with people.
Yeah, but I think it's really affected our personal lives.
I agree.
And our personal relationships, and that has trickled into some of those experiences.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I think about that cancel culture piece in terms of how we allow people the space to learn. Also, we've all been novices at all of this at some point.
Absolutely.
We've all said the wrong thing at some point.
And will.
Yeah, and we'll continue to.
Absolutely.
In a trusted community, there is space for you to make those mistakes and learn from them.
Ooh. Wouldn't that be nice?
Yeah. So unionize your workforces, bring democratic communication into your personal life.
Yeah, right.
Start with what you know is what I would say is where is the space? What space do you occupy in your life where you can bring these concepts to them?
Totally.
And for me, it's the fact that I'm a middle manager in a library. I have some ability to shape the menu, and this is how I want to shape it.
Wow. I love that. I mean, that's the ultimate creative tools, our mind, and thinking strategies and being more in tune with thinking about how we're going to shape those experiences for ourselves and others around us, and as a ripple effect.
Yeah.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Melissa, for
Thank you,
sharing all of
Erica.
your ideas and talking with us about this amazing and really exciting. And I want to talk for 4 more hours. If there's is there any other book that you would recommend? I know we had 2 under the belt. Is there another book that you might recommend?
Sure, I'll go with some fiction this time.
Yeah.
But it will be in the same theme.
Sure, do it.
It's called Babel, or Babel if you're British. The author is actually Chinese, but went to school in Britain, so it's got a British perspective. So it is a dark academia fantasy.
Cool.
But it is ultimately about colonization, capitalism, race, class, and how the institution of academia upholds and influences all of those things.
Wow.
More specifically, I don't want to give anything away, but it takes place in a fictionalized 1800s Oxford University. Students from around the world have been recruited based on their differing languages, and what they do is they create translations. There's some magic involved that basically they find out is helping the British Empire exploit the entire world.
Whoa.
And so they have a response to that. And what I would say is that response is the only response for colonized and oppressed people. So the subtitle of the book is basically is Babel, or a history of the Oxford Translators' Revolution and the Necessity of Violence. It's really good.
That sounds great. I'm putting that on my Audible.
Yes.
Audible
It's a great audiobook too.
Oh, fantastic. Yeah. That's how I roll these days. Thank you so much for all of these wonderful little thoughtful gifts and tools to use moving forward in our lives. Really appreciate that. I always feel more grounded, actually, after talking with you, because I think I fly and I'm fiery.
Yes.
So the pause, I'm gonna take these pieces with me. So thank you so much.
Thanks you
for sharing with everybody.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. And if anybody wants to get a hold of you, where can they find you?
You can find me at the library.
Mead Public Library.
Yes.
Sheboygan, Wisconsin. Huge thanks to Mead Public Library, the fantastic Melissa Prentice, Josh Littner, Annalisa Finca, the radio committee, our amazing engineer John Tully, and for the title, Photo and Fabulous, theme music composed and performed by Cooper Deers.
In the Act is produced in the studios at Mead Public Library in Sheboygan, Wisconsin. More information on the web at meadpl.org.